expert, mentor and coach, and he's been sharing his unique perspective approach for over 20 years with leaders around the world in senior management and business development. And Beatrice is an award-winning writer of poetry and prose. She's also studied medicine and worked as an NHS doctor. And she's got a knack of orchestrating words in a beautiful symphony. And together, Ed and Beatrice make a powerhouse of a spiritual couple. And they're here to share a little bit about resilience and spirituality. So please give them a warm welcome.
So thank you so much for that introduction. Is this okay? Is it everyone
I
clear?
don't think it's on. Is it on?
I don't know if it is.
Trying to work it out, but
Okay.
I'm trying to work it. Okay, no problem. So yeah, I want to begin by saying what a pleasure it is to be with all of you. And yeah, there's a few things we're going to discuss today around resilience, stress, how to handle it. And what we thought we would do, first of all, Beatrice will speak a little bit, because as was explained in the introduction, she'll speak a little bit about her journey and also experience as a doctor in the NHS. And then what we'll also get into is some of the research around stress resilience. And also, okay. Suddenly it's working, okay, no problem. And then also, especially, a spiritual perspective on this. And I'll just also say that this subject is very, very dear to our hearts, and also relates to certain experiences we both had. So we want it to always be of maximal value for you, so feel free as we're going through it, if there's anything you want to note down, any questions that you want to ask, make a note so we can actually get into the Q&A afterwards. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Do you want to begin?
yeah. So hello everyone. This topic is very, very dear to us, very dear to me, because I know how serious stress is and how seriously it can impact us and just really every aspect of our lives. As my husband mentioned, I study medicine, so I had the aspiration of trying to help people through my work. And I remember, for those of us who are studying, often exam situation is incredibly stressful. But mine was stressful for another set of reasons, not just because it was exam season. So I was doing my finals. I had spent the last 2 years of my course literally just at home studying, then going to the hospitals, doing placements, coming home, studying. I was just the whole last 2 years. And so I would call home, and I was expecting some kind of pep talk from my mum, like a mini, yeah, you can do it, come on, me, that kind of thing. Which she's great at doing, she does it all the time. But on this occasion, she was kind of withdrawn and quiet, and I thought, okay, something's a little bit off here, and I was hoping, okay, let me talk to John then, because I have a brother, John. He's a year and a half older than me, and he's like the kind of comic relief in the family. Like he's just, you got that relative who's always like cracking jokes and slightly inappropriately, but it's just really funny. So that's my brother John. So I thought, maybe I'll just talk to him instead of Mum. But Mum was like, no, he's not able to come to the phone right now. So I must add, I was studying in Cardiff, well known for its sheep and for the rain. And very friendly people as well. So that's why I studied there. But my family are based in London, so I was calling home. And he couldn't come to the phone. So anyway, so I did my finals, and I wasn't really communicating with my brother during this time. And then I remember on the last coming to the end of my exams, my mum said, finally, B, you need to come home. And usually after exams, it's all about partying. Okay, let's see the spiritual version. I don't know what do you do instead of partying. Anyway, so we're getting together after exams. That's what we usually do. My mum was like, no, you need to come home, immediately. So that's what I did. I have a half brother who very kindly picked me up from university and drove me all the way home. And when I got home, my mum said, so John, he and I saw my brother John, and usually he's got a kind of curvy kind of figure. That's how he described himself, I'm sure. But he lost a lot of weight, and he was really like, he was kind of like, yeah, you know, check me out. So that I told you he has a comic sense of humour, so he's like, yeah, I've lost lots of weight. And my mum also explained that he'd had this cough for 2 months that just wasn't going away, and he'd had a very strange chest X-ray. And so he was going to go in for more tests at the hospital. And so, I was only 23 at the time, John was 24. And it was, so I was kind of with him on that journey. So I was meant to be starting my first job as a doctor in August. That's when all they say don't get ill in August, don't go to hospital in August, because that's when all new doctors start. So you've been warned. Anyway, so I was going to start my new job, so I had like 5 weeks, like the last massive holiday you could imagine, as a student. It's just like 5-week block, and I didn't have like major plans, but I thought maybe the spiritual version of a party somewhere in there. But I ended up spending the whole 5 weeks just in the hospital with my brother, because he was diagnosed with a cancer actually at the age of 24, and it was a cancer that was it's basically in his chest. It's called the lymph nodes, so the glands which help us to fight infection. So the white blood cells, basically, that's where the cancer was in his chest, and so that's why he'd lost a lot of weight. And so I was starting like my first year of medicine, and with the awareness that my brother was very seriously ill. And so he'd had chemotherapy, we thought was successful, then the cancer came back. Then he had radiotherapy, and the cancer came back again. And by this stage, that was the first year, and by this stage I was starting my second year of medicine. I remember we were going wedding shopping in. I'm going to test you. Where did we go wedding shopping?
India.
I should say what town. I think it was Delhi, wasn't it?
Delhi.
Yeah, because we got married at this big Bhaktivedanta Manor. I don't know if some of you, probably all of you have heard of it, or maybe some of you haven't, but it's a really large temple, North London. So we got married there. So we went to Delhi for our wedding shopping. And then we got this call from, I can't remember, I think it was John, maybe it was my mum, saying you need to come back because John's sick again. And so I just remember sort of just rushing, we rushed through a wedding so quickly in terms of organising, so I just really wanted to make sure that my brother could attend. And so we didn't have a honeymoon. I got back to work like 2 days after the wedding. I still had like the henna all the way up my arms. And just back at work. And so that second year was very, very hectic, as you can imagine. It was very, very intense. And so it got to a stage where so we got that call. You can imagine the amount of stress, and this is really building up something. And so we got that call that the tumour had come back the third time now, and they tested me, and there was a 10% chance that I could be a donor for my brother. And so thankfully, by the grace of God, grace of Krishna, I was a donor. So I had to have, I remember having, I had to have injections that would it kind of expands the white cells in my body, like it expands the bone marrow, which produces white blood cells, and so that was happening. So I was having those injections. I just had 1 week off to have that, and I remember it was so difficult to walk because my bones were just so achy. So I ended up we did the stem cell. It's called a stem cell transplant, and it was also I think stress is such an important topic because it's so important to be aware of when it's creeping up on you. Sometimes we feel like we can just try to cope and manage, and sometimes we think we can organise ourselves out of stress. We can think ourselves out. Sometimes we might even gaslight ourselves and say, no, it's not that bad, it's not that bad. But actually it's really important to recognise when it's coming upon us, and to really take steps to help ourselves through that situation, which my husband will go into. And so I didn't do any of that, and I thought, no, I'll keep going. I can keep going. And I remember, and doctors can be really strange people, that we think that everyone else can get sick except us, and everyone else needs to take breaks, and everyone else needs to eat or relax except us when we're working. And so that was the ethos when I was at that time. And so what happened is I thought, I'm just going to keep going. Somehow I'm just going to bulldoze through this whole year. So I didn't take any time off apart from when I was having injections for the stem cell transplant. So that was just 1 week. And my second year medicine, I did ITU. So that's if you can imagine someone who's in the army, we expect some really tough person, big muscles. And so those people exist in the army, and they also exist in the ITU. That's what every IT consultant. Anyway, in my imagination, as I think back to that time, but really the ITU doctors, IT consultants, they just have this kind of, we can take anything on. They're kind of rugged He-Men. So the kind of attitude will say, no, don't take any work time off. Just come in. So I remember that the day that I was hooked up to some machines in my brother's hospital, and then that same night I had to start doing ITU rotation. So I left my brother's hospital and I went to my hospital while I was working, and I just then I started my ITU rotation. And again I was thinking, I'm gonna get through all this. It's going really well. And spoiler alert, it wasn't going really well. And so I just kept going, and there was I remember. So then I started my so the people who organise medical rotas, they're not. I don't think they actually practice medicine, because the way they organise the rotas is crazy. So we had a 3-week block of on calls. So on call means that so you have your normal wards work with all your patients on the wards. Then you have your on-call block where you basically see the patients in A&E, patients who are coming into the hospital fresh from home, or maybe the GP clinic. And so in my hospital we had 3 weeks, so we would just do that. And so you'd have 1 week you're doing days, so you work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. And then you had then in the middle you'd work nights, so you work from 9 p.m. to 9 a.m. And then you work back on days again, so you have 3 days off and you work back on days. And so I specifically remember about to go into the night shift portion, so I was desperately trying to sleep during the day. And then I got a call from my brother's hospital, and because I was trying to sleep during the day, so I didn't want to answer the phone, and then the phone rang. And I looked at it and I thought, oh God, it's the transplant team. And I was just terrified. I was I don't know what happened. What if the transplant fails? What if they're telling me that John's this? Because this is the third time the cancer's come back, but they didn't know what they were going to do after that. So I was oh my God. And obviously I was so stressed I couldn't get back to sleep. I tried to call them. No one was picking up. So I had no idea what was going on. Then I went into a night shift, and that was thankfully my patients were okay. But it was so stressful, and I was so tired. Have you ever been maybe when you've done all-nighters for exams, or maybe some situation at work, where you're so tired you don't realise how tired you are, and you kind of get into this kind of space of being actually kind of weirdly alert, but you're not actually alert, your brain is not functioning. And that's how tired I was. I thought, oh my God, I'm doing okay, I'm alert, and no, we were not doing okay. And so that was the night shift, and I remember in the morning after the night before, just being in the doctor's office. As I said, doctors can be quite unsupportive sometimes, and being in a small doctor's office, maybe twice the size of this stage behind us, and we were all crammed in there, and we just reviewing our patients, and I wasn't filling out drug charts properly, unfortunately, and the consultant was really annoyed on the ward round. I just got roasted, and I just thought, it was so much stress. I just thought, I don't even know how to process this situation. And my husband, he'll talk about solutions, and I think one really important solution is one when we can kind of step away from the situation that is really antagonizing us, and in this space we can kind of recontextualize what's happening. And I just didn't have that distance, and it was so stressful, and I just couldn't process what was going on. So then what happened is, so thankfully the transplant team weren't calling to say the transplant had failed. That wasn't what they were calling for at all. And yeah, everything was fine with my brother. The transplant worked, and he's still alive today. This is it's like 10 years ago now. He was still alive today, so it was successful. But what I had done is I had neglected myself for that whole 2-year period. As I said, I didn't take any time off. I was going to my own hospital, and then at the weekends I go to my brother's hospital, and then I kind of come home for like a day just to cook food, and I'd go back to my hospital. And that was my life for a year. And and then I experienced then afterwards I thought, oh yeah, everything's going well. And I experienced so many issues with my own health after that. And it's taken so long and so much heavy investment just for those 2 years where I wasn't addressing the stress, and I really just let it get to me. Oops, sorry. Just for those 2 years I wasn't addressing the stress. It has impacted not just my life, my husband's life as well, for like over 10 years. So I think stress is an incredibly important discussion to have, and when we invite any kind of disturbance in our life, it can have such a deep and profound impact. It's really something not to ignore. But I think the wonderful and beautiful thing about this is, since that time, like myself and my husband, we've been on such a journey to learn about how to take care of the self, how to address any kind of even slight disorders, like slight imbalance of the body, like when your body's slightly going out of balance. We really take that on board. We're really sensitive to this now, and it's helped us to study so many different kind of modalities to really support people, and we've applied them on our own lives. We've seen like how much growth and how much transformations happen in our own lives, and now it's helped us to share it with you. So that's what I really had to share, actually, is just how important stress tackling is, how distressing situations can just sneak up on us, how we're not even expecting, sometimes we're just not expecting these situations to come upon us, and it's like there's this distance between our perception of reality and how reality actually is, and in that space that is stress. That's our misperception. So thank you so much for listening, and do you like to jump in and add anything? Or?
No worries. So to echo the point that was made by the points that were made by Beatrice, it's like the disease of our age. The way that the common patterns of society function is. I was discussing with some friends recently that we see in the modern world. In the past, when society was much more based upon higher values, then it was more God-centered. As it became less like that, still there was a certain level of focus on the human being, human well-being. So it may not have been so God-centered, but at least it was human-centered. But as society deteriorates, then instead of worshipping God or even worshipping other people, what becomes worshipped is money. And therefore you have a society which is more about making money, right? So there's that famous saying that we're meant to love people and use things, right? But in the modern society, it's very much one where we love things and therefore we use people. And that kind of society is, that value system starts to cause stress. And I was thinking about this a lot, that everything that we do behind it is a value system, right? A value system really means, what do I consider to be ultimately important? And whatever I consider to be valuable, to be important, is not actually based upon what I say, right? what I consider to be valuable and important is actually shown by what we do and how we live. It was a really key realization for me that for many people, and I've had this experience also, for many people, I started to see that what they said was important to them was one thing. But then when I saw how they spent their time, energy, money, focus, thoughts, skills even, it revealed a completely different picture. Now, why is this important? One of the most amazing things on my journey of Bhagavad Gita even was not just the points which are made by this ancient wisdom text, but it was also the transformation it had in my ability to see the world and to think about the world. This is, I think, one of the hidden superpowers of spiritual wisdom, because there's this Sanskrit term which is called darshan, which means literally to be able to see. And what it became more and more apparent to me was that if I held onto a material paradigm, I would be able to see things somewhat externally. But through cultivating spiritual knowledge, it gave me the ability to literally see behind the scenes, like seeing behind the curtain. And so I understood many, many more things about the subtleties as to how we sometimes get ourselves into challenging situations. But it also gave me the keys, and it's something I still experience to this day. It increasingly gave me the keys to see how to reverse engineer that process. It is very similar to Einstein's idea that we cannot solve an issue at the same level of consciousness that created it. So to Beatrice's point, one of the things I learned about the hidden cause of stress, we often talk about this in terms of our journey, is that the hidden cause of stress, if you strip it down to the underlying principle, the law behind it, is that the hidden cause of stress, unhealthy stress, is the distance. This is really important. This one thing really helped to change my life. The hidden cause of stress was the distance between expectation and experience. Right? And I think we can relate to that. You sometimes go into a situation, let's say you're going to start a job, and they tell you, the job's going to be easy, the manager's fantastic, the team are wonderful, everyone's supportive, etc. Right? So what that does, very interestingly enough, it has an effect not just on our mind. When we hear certain things or when we have a certain expectation, subconsciously we calibrate for it. Okay? It's like if you expect something to be easy, you're not kind of being tense. You think, it's not going to be a problem. I'm relaxed. I'm chilled. The blood pressure doesn't go up or anything like that. There's a thing called heart rate variability. Your heartbeat stays relatively similar because you're not expecting it to be any issue. So the expectation is in one place. Now, if the experience is something completely different, the manager's terrible, all the team are hostile, they're lazy, right? They told you it will be like a 9-to-5 job, but now you're being forced to come in at 7 a.m. and you're staying until 9 p.m. or even later. It's not just the fact that you've got more to do, it's that jarring experience that I was setting myself up to think I'm going to be doing one thing, and I found out that what I'm being actually asked to do is so much harder. And therefore, in the modern world that we live in, a lot of people's stress experiences, this was the clue that I got from Bhagavad Gita, a lot of people's stress experiences is because actually we've come into a situation with one expectation and we found that the situation is completely different. Can anyone relate to that in their own life experiences? Right? Isn't that interesting? Again, and this is what I loved about the Bhagavad Gita, it strips things down to the heartbeat. They call it, there's a Sanskrit term called saragrahi, which means one who knows the essence of something. So in my day job, we teach managers and global leaders around the world. Actually, today we were talking about this same topic, resilience and wellness. And it's always interesting because we try to discuss techniques and we will do some of that. But what I, again, found so beautiful from the Bhagavad Gita is that in this ancient conversation, right, and get this, an ancient conversation in a very stressful situation. Right? In this ancient conversation of a very stressful situation, Krishna and Arjuna are speaking, and Krishna's giving him all of these deep secrets at a time of high stress. I mean, we sometimes talk about different situations that we're going through, right? Sometimes we feel stressed by our relatives, but they're not trying to kill you. You understand? Well, hopefully not, hopefully not, right? So it was so interesting to me when I looked at these dynamics, and a key part of what happens in the Bhagavad Gita, which I have found has been so beneficial for me in my own life. A key part of the conversation in Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna is speaking to Arjuna on the battlefield, is actually helping Arjuna to redefine what he understands about reality. That one thing changed my life. And to this day, it's still changing my life. And I know that some of us in this room have had this conversation, because sometimes we go into a situation expecting one thing. Again, expectation here. And then our experience is somewhere else. If the experience is above expectation, no problem, right? Great, nice surprise, went above and beyond. But in so many cases in modern society, our difficulties are compounded because we expect one thing and then we get something way below what we expect. Now, interestingly enough, in the Bhagavad Gita, there are these, it's a literature of literally 700 verses. One of the most powerful verses, but which is so profound that it's so easy to not really see the deep meaning of it. There's a Sanskrit verse, Matraspastas tu kunteya shitoshna sukha dukada. In the conversation between Krishna and Arjuna, Krishna tells Arjuna, he says something about the nature of happiness and distress, right? Distress. He says they come and go like winter and summer seasons. And he says one has to learn to tolerate them. Now, on the surface, yeah, of course, yeah. You're saying that sometimes things go well, sometimes things don't go well. We all know that's very easy. It's not quite that straightforward. It's not quite that straightforward. What Krishna tells Arjuna, and actually the training, and this is really powerful, the training that this deep wisdom is trying to give us is that same point that Krishna was given to Arjuna, recalibrating what to expect of a situation. I deal with leaders all the time, not just in my job, but around the world, in other communities. And sometimes, being very transparent, people come up to me, these leaders, they're terrible, they're not doing this, they're not doing that. When back in the day before I knew this stuff, when people would tell me that, I'd be like, yeah, you're right. Why are they like that? This is disgusting. Why don't they behave properly? They should lead properly. As I started to become more immersed in this wisdom teaching, and as I started to feel the recalibration in my own mind, it made my life much less stressful. Much less stressful. Why? Why? Because it started to change my perception of reality. And I really mean that. What I started to see is a little bit more objectively and impartially what I could and could not expect from people in different situations. For example, in terms of leadership, I saw that some leaders that we interact with around the world in different communities, I saw that these were people who had never been trained before in leadership. And you sometimes see this in corporate organizations or other organizations, right? You have someone, they're fantastic as an individual contributor, doing a great job. So in our wisdom, what do we do to that person who's great at looking after their own work? We make them what? We make them leaders. And is looking after other people the same as looking after your own work? Is that the same? It's not the same. It's a completely different skill set, actually. So many organizations that we interact with, they're now rethinking this model. They're rethinking, just because someone's great at doing their own job, does that mean that they'll be good at looking after other people and inspiring, empowering, training, developing other people? And it's very interesting because that understanding that the modern society is coming to is, funnily enough, the exact understanding that was already given in the Vedic culture over 5,000 years ago. In the Vedic culture over 5,000 years ago, it wasn't that because you're good at making an individual contribution that we would automatically make you the leader of other people. It was understood at that time, and Arjuna, as a warrior, he was part of that class of individuals who were known to have a natural ability to be good leaders. And actually, that's one of the biggest causes of stress in the world, actually. The biggest cause, and it's so interesting as an emblem, one of the biggest causes of stress in the world is an indirect effect of leadership. We have natural leaders in society who are our first natural leaders? What do you think? Parents, right? Isn't that interesting? So my wife, because she studied medicine, we also, when we were going through these health issues, we started diving into these ancient systems of well-being. And I'm sure many of you will be familiar with Ayurveda, one of the most ancient systems. And it was incredibly helpful. Not just Ayurveda, but I know you did, where did you do the yoga?
Oh, Eco Village.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we have a few others who did it. So there's there's an eco village, there's a retreat center, and if you haven't been, you should definitely go and visit. You will absolutely fall in love with the place. It's magical. It's a place called the Govardhan Eco Village, and they do courses throughout the year. They hold retreats and so on. So Beatrice did a yoga teacher training, and I remember you actually mentioned that when you were there, you actually found that your health was actually better as well.
Yeah, definitely. Just 4 weeks of yoga, just about 4.5 hours of yoga every single day, and obviously being in a very, very natural environment as well, it helped my health amazingly. Yeah.
And so one of the things that was discovered when we were looking at all this is that, going back to what you said about leaders. See, leadership actually, the Sanskrit word for the natural leaders in society, of which Arjuna was an emblem, was that they were Kshatriyas. And it's a Sanskrit word which means to protect others from hurt. As I started to study, I'm very much interdisciplinary. So I always look to see, what does the spiritual teachings say? How does that relate to the teachings of yoga generally? How does that relate to the teachings of Ayurveda and well-being? And I like to calibrate and see how all of those come together to give a deeper understanding and deeper insight. So this idea of leadership means protection. Now, when people feel protected, we're gonna do this together, because it's a very intuitive and natural logic that we see in the Vedic literatures. If our parents are the first leaders, and if the leaders are meant to protect, then a child who grows up in an environment where they feel deeply protected, what does it do? What qualities does that child develop? They start to feel more what? Secure, right? Have we noticed that in the modern world, as we see, there's more and more insecurity? Have you noticed that? Yeah. Sometimes where people you just brush past them on your way to work, and because they're so upset or insecure already, you slightly brush past them. Everyone's enraged, right? Anger, resentment, shouting, screaming, and you think, whoa, this is an overreaction to something small. But when we look into it more deeply, it's a sensitivity that comes from insecurity. So if the leaders are the natural leaders of the parents, and if the leadership are meant to give protection, then when we have a society where people feel really protected, the result of that is you have a society of very robust individuals, very secure. I was looking at this for some research, and it was very, very interesting. It talked about something, I could relate to this in my own life. It talked about how when someone feels very secure, and let's say people don't treat that person very well, the person who's very, very secure, do they just become enraged and angry with that person? What do you think? No, right? Intuitively, someone who feels very, very secure in themselves, someone who feels that they know that they are loved and valuable unconditionally, inherently, then when someone acts negatively towards them, how do they tend to respond, and how do they tend to think about that behavior? I'd like to hear from you. What do you think? Someone who feels very secure, and then someone acts negatively towards them. A very secure person, someone who feels very much deeply internally that they are loved and valued inherently.
Don't take it personally.
They definitely, who said that?
Me.
They absolutely don't take it personally. And if the other person's bad behavior, what do they think about the other person's bad behavior?
Compassion.
They see it with compassion, and they recognize that the way that the person's treating them, is it a reflection on them?
It's a reflection on the other person.
Absolutely.
Yes.
You see? And this became a huge journey for me. Again, looking at this from the Ayurvedic point of view, what I learned in Ayurveda, and we discussed this, is that in a natural, more healthy, spiritually centered society, people were given a lot more attention. Right? Have you ever noticed that in the modern society, everyone wants to become famous? Have you noticed that? Isn't that interesting, right? Fame means I'm looking for attention. I want people to, begins with V. You know the word. I'm looking for, begins with V. Validation. And what I started to see on my journey was that to the extent that I didn't have it inside me, to that extent, I was desperate to receive it from outside. But there was a bit more to it than that. I realized that if I didn't recalibrate, if I didn't work on that, then it would mean that my whole life, my self-value would be dependent on who? On other people. Now, is everyone very, very stable in the way that they treat people in this world? What do you think? No, right? So then what happens is, and this is one of the dynamics that cause stress. This is one of the dynamics that cause stress. We said the distance between expectation and experience. There are many people who, for example, try to become famous thinking that I'll be adored, I'll be valued, everyone will think I'm wonderful. And then when they achieve what they're looking for, expectation, it's very different to the experience. And then actually, I remember my teacher, my spiritual teacher, he was an advisor to many heads of state, leaders, celebrities. One of the people he was an advisor to was a famous boxer named Muhammad Ali. And he was with Muhammad Ali early in the morning, because Muhammad Ali, he would wake up early, he would engage in meditation, prayer, etc. He was quite a religious, spiritual person. So one morning, and my teacher mentions this in a particular class, he was with Muhammad Ali early in the morning in his mansion. And Muhammad Ali said to him, he said, when I was young, I grew up in the ghetto. I was extremely poor and I always dreamed of being rich and famous. Muhammad Ali was telling my teacher this. He said, right now, he said, I can fly people in from all over the world. I've got these big mansions. I have huge amounts of wealth. And he said, but even though I have all this stuff, I think back and I think I was happier before I had any of it. Muhammad Ali told my teacher, he said, right now, it's early in the morning, and I've got people calling me up, family members calling me up, and all the time, whenever they call me, they're always asking for something. And Muhammad Ali told my teacher, he said, you're practically the only person I know in my life who comes to me in order to give something. Everyone else simply comes to me in order to take. And he said, this was really interesting for me, because this relates to stress as well. He said, therefore, I practically don't trust anyone except you. One of the hidden causes of stress, again, taking it to the level of Bhagavad Gita, because Bhagavad Gita takes it to the essential principles. A real cause of stress, a root cause of stress, is a lack of trust. A lack of trust in what? A lack of trust that I'm going to be loved, protected, and also survive. Isn't that interesting? In the Sanskrit word, in the Sanskrit language, the word for trust or faith, do you guys want to know what that word is? It's called Shraddha. Beautiful, because this language is so deep, the words itself explains its meaning. So Shraddha means literally, the Sanskrit understanding of it is the place where the heart finds shelter. Isn't that interesting? The place where the heart finds shelter. The reason why the Bhagavad Gita speaks to every major human condition, including stress, is because where we place our hearts are basically directly linked to what we are expecting. We place our hearts somewhere that we think is going to give us the highest and most stable return. Does that make sense? Right? Just like many of you have a relationship, right? Why are you with that particular person? Because you think, if I give this person my heart, they're not going to misuse it. Fair? Right? Whether it's a blind date, Tinder, whatever it is, right? People are going to go where they think that if I give my heart to this, I'm not going to be heartbroken. In the research on stress, one of the root causes of stress is actually damaging relationships. And my teacher wrote a book called Spiritual Warrior 2, and it's all about relationships from a spiritual perspective. And he said that the people that we are closest to, they're the people who can help us the most, but they're also the people who can do what? They can also hurt us the most. And it's for the same reason, because I've actually placed my heart there. Right? One of the key causes of stress in the modern world, ironically, is that people are struggling to give their hearts to anyone because their hearts have been so broken in previous experiences. And I'm looking at the body language in the room. Is there anyone in the room who knows someone who, even if they meet someone who's good, they're still carrying some of the wounds from a previous relationship? It could be a friendship, it could be a relationship with elders, parents, and so on. And because they're carrying those wounds, the next time they meet someone who actually is a good person, they struggle to actually give themselves in the relationship because they haven't necessarily healed from those previous bad experiences. Raise your hand if you know someone who's in that particular space. Okay. These are some of the hidden dynamics that go on. And just as we talk about relationships between us as humans, there's a deeper angle, the deepest angle that Krishna is speaking to Arjuna about. He's saying that you can have a fundamentally deep and stable position in this world as you interact. If you give your heart, Krishna is basically saying, if you give your heart to me. Very profound. When I first read Bhagavad Gita, I didn't actually understand how much it speaks to every aspect of the human condition. I thought, that's nice, it's a religious text, great. We have to go somewhere else for all this other stuff. But I saw over many years of study that it speaks to the deepest aspirations of each and every one of us. But it speaks in a very, very interesting way. I was thinking about this. I'll be very transparent with you. I have some friends, they also accept Bhagavad Gita. And they think, yeah, it's nice for, spiritual stuff. But when it gets down to the material or the social, we need to go somewhere else because it's just like spiritual. And I realized that they didn't understand the Bhagavad Gita properly. The Bhagavad Gita actually, for me and my experience, is giving social solutions, it's giving external solutions, it's also giving spiritual solutions. But, and this is a big but, what I realized is that in the modern world, so many of the solutions we get, we call them, we explain that those solutions are in what we call the mode of ignorance or passion, which means that they're more reactionary. I was looking at some research on this. They've done research on organizations which are trying to give wellness and resilience to their staff. And they looked at different strategies. Some organizations, what they do is they've got resources for you after you have an issue. Right? You're burning out, we've got a solution, or you're stressed out, we've got a solution, your nervous system's down, we've got a solution, you're fatigued, whatever it is, we've got a solution. So that solution is considered to be a solution from the Bhagavad Gita's perspective, which is reactionary. So reactionary solutions are in the category that they have a word called rajas, which means basically it's a reactive or passionate way of dealing with things. Now, what Krishna and Arjuna were discussing and what the Bhagavad Gita gives are solutions which are in a higher category, which means two things. First of all, solutions in what we call the mode of goodness. Solutions in the mode of goodness means I arrange things before the issue comes. When I was speaking to the managers today about stress and well-being, we shared this model called the stress bucket. Anyone heard of that before, the stress bucket? So, I was working with someone who was ex-military. He used to train the British military intelligence. So he introduced me to this model of the stress bucket. It's a very simple model and you can remember it. It's easy to apply and think about in terms of your own stress management. He said, first of all, everyone has a different size bucket. Right, that was the first point. What does that mean practically? If everyone has a different size stress bucket, it means what?
Tolerant.
Exactly, different levels of tolerance. Because I'm into personal development, leadership development, spiritual development, I'm always looking at this stuff. The most rigorous scientific model for personality is called the Big 5 personality traits model. In that model, it talks about 5 dimensions of personality. One of them, the last one, is called neuroticism. So people who are low in neuroticism, they tend to be people who apply for things like the military. Okay? What does low neuroticism mean? What do you think it means? They have a natural tolerance of stress. There are other people who are high as a default level of neuroticism. That means they're more sensitive to pressure. Do you know anyone like that? Right? Do you have friends like that? Some people, that one thing doesn't affect them much, but the same thing another person, it really affects them. Anyone know people like that? This is what I was talking about. And even in the Vedic culture, Kshatriyas, they tended to have quite a high tolerance for physical stress. There's many famous stories like that, where the Kshatriyas, and that's why traditionally, it's not that everyone fought. There are some people, because their stress bucket is different, they're fighting and they've got more ability to tolerate physical pain. Arjuna's like that. There are so many other personalities in the Vedic literatures like that. So this colleague of mine, he said, first of all, everyone's got a different size stress bucket. Everyone has a natural default level of ability to tolerate stress. He said, but no matter no matter what size your bucket is, there are certain practices that can actually help you in two ways. Number one, based upon the stress bucket, things fill up, right? You've got a deadline coming up, right? Or at home, someone shouted at you, right? Or, there's some physical pain that you're dealing with and you haven't gone to see the doctor yet. So these things are building up your stress in your stress buckets. Your stress bucket's reaching capacity. And that happens to us every single day. That's not necessarily the problem. Because actually stress is a healthy human response. As long as it comes on when it's needed, and after it's needed, what should it do? It should switch off. When we talk in modern society about stress, we often conflate the two things. Healthy stress is actually a survival response. I was reading about this. Stress is your survival software. Okay? So, if you're being chased by a lion, dude, you better feel under some pressure, right? Imagine you're there, the lion's chasing after you. It's like, I'm just gonna chill out. It's okay, I don't wanna stress it, right? Right? You're gonna die. So stress is actually our survival software. It's good as long as it comes on when it's necessary, and when it's no longer necessary, it should switch off. So when the stress response comes on in a healthy way, it actually gives you more energy. When stress response comes on in a healthy way, it actually makes you more focused. I'm sure some of us can relate to that. You had exams coming up, right? Anyone ever pulled an all-nighter? Right. Anyone found that you had the energy to pull an all-nighter, right? You could somehow keep going. Anyone found that you crashed after the all-nighter? Okay, you're talking about language. Okay. So when it's actually working in a healthy way, the stress response gives you more focus, it gives you more mental sharpness, it gives you more energy, and actually it upregulates the immune system actually. Yeah. The problem we have in the modern society is not that we can't switch on the stress factor when we need it. The problem is that we can't do what? We can't switch it off. So now that system that's now on, because you need some extra energy, etc., what happens when it stays on? Thoughts. What happens if it stays on? You can't switch it off again. Definitely burnout.
I just want to also jump in. So
Yeah,
we had an exercise actually devised for everyone.
Are you gonna go? Okay, yes. So one of the things I want you to do is I wanted you to actually, because I wanted to make it interactive. So before we get to some of the practices around managing stress, I wanted you to just share with someone next to you. What have you found? Because my teacher would always talk about this. We tend to recall about 70% of what we discuss, 80% of what we experience, and 90 to 95% of what we teach or share. We're not interested in giving the talk for the sake of giving the talk. We want the talk to help us to transform. So what we're going to ask you to do, we'll just give you 5 minutes. So we're going to do this together. We're going to ask you just to speak to someone next to you and share. What have you found in your life helps you to release some of that stress? We know that things can cause stress, but we're also going to crowdsource some of the best practices that you've seen work. So it's no longer something just philosophical or idealistic. There's things that you've seen in your own life that have helped you to switch off some of that stress response. We're going to give you 5 minutes to discuss with someone next to you, then we're going to hear from you. 5 minutes to discuss, over to you. I'm gonna ask for your attention again, please. So we're gonna ask for a few ideas. Again, we want to build this into something very practical, that we're discussing the perception piece, but we also want to hear from you a few things which you found help to, again, looking at this model of the stress bucket. So we've got things that happen in our lives which fill up the bucket with some stress, but there's also things that we can do that can release some of that stress back out. And this is some of the things we're asking you to be sharing with your peers in the room. So I'd like to hear maybe one or two ideas. What did you talk about? Yes, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I would love to go for night walks.
Okay, interesting. So tell me about the night walks. When you're walking, what do you feel is a difference? What does it do for you?
I don't know, when I start to observe such as a tree or like a lamppost or just cars going by, I feel like this is life, you know. We don't seem to observe situations nowadays because it's in a tunnel. But in the night it's very calm, it's very tranquil, and you really get to connect with your surroundings a lot better, and you feel more internally at ease.
Absolutely.
I can't describe it as a feeling.
Okay. I want to build on that. And there's huge amounts of research on this. So again, we were discussing this earlier today. When you actually stop and just become aware, right? That process of being aware, what it does is it brings you back into the present moment. A lot of our stress actually has to do with two different dynamics, but they're all around the same thing. Many of us, we're stressed because we're thinking about the past, right? Something happened. Sometimes, I've seen this many times in my life. You're in the bus or you're in public transport and you're hearing someone on the phone. Oh, yeah, when she said that to me again, right, next time she says that to me, I'm going to say this to her. And you're thinking, wow. It's something that happened before, right? You know, how dare she talk to me like that? You know, you see the way she looked at me? Next time she does that, I'm going to say that. It's like, wow, okay. And everyone else is hearing this and everyone else is getting stressed just by having that conversation, right? So one form of stress is that part of our consciousness is actually anchored in the past. It's very, very interesting. As I started to learn more about spirituality, it became so interesting that actually a hidden cause of stress in many relationships is actually a lack of forgiveness. Isn't that interesting? You go on courses and seminars, they don't tell you you're stressed out because you haven't forgiven someone. But it's a fact. It's a fact. What it implies is that our ability to handle stress and to be resilient has a lot to do with the quality of our relationships. Right? Sometimes they talk about this in terms of emotional intelligence. There's this relationship intelligence. And again, going back to this same theme, Krishna's telling Arjuna, this is a reality of the world. This is you think you're going to be happy by not fighting, but this is the reality of the world. You think you're going to be happy by doing this, but actually this is the reality of the world. And what I saw in my own consciousness, the more I connected with Bhagavad Gita as it is, I felt that I was being consciously trained. Recalibrate your expectations. Your expectations should be aligned. So again, we said that expectations are different from experience for many people, which is a cause of stress. But what the Bhagavad Gita was teaching me is what you need to do is recalibrate your expectation so it aligns with existence. If your expectations align with existence, suddenly you remove at the root cause so many things which stress people. So linking to your point, I didn't want to diverge. What they found is that when people, for example, spend time in nature, you're closer to God's original creation. They found that when you see the green of leaves or the grass, that has that natural green that you see, it lowers the blood pressure. There's a book, and I actually found it online. It's a book called Earthing, and the author's name is Clint Ober, O-B-E-R. And what they've done in the book, they talk about experiments. Experiments where people walk barefoot on the grass or on the sand. Experiments where that people spend regular time in nature touching the trees and stuff like that. And what they said was so astounding for me. Because in the Vedic literature, it was talking about how we have 7 mothers, right? And one of the 7 mothers was actually the earth. And in many cultures, they talk about Mother Nature, right? And they said that just like a mother, going back to the theme we talked about, the protective theme, the symbol of the motherly energy is nourishing and protecting and nurturing. So what they found is people who spend regular time in nature, and especially if they're in physical contact with nature, right? So we said walking barefoot. I'm sure you can't do it in London when it's cold in the winter time, but you get the idea. And you can, again, everything I'm saying, this is all scientifically proven research. What they found is, and I saw this in the book, they had pictures of people who had wounds, and they showed that by people being in regular touch with the earth, the wounds healed at a faster rate. right? They did research on the electrical activity in the brain and the stress levels, and they measured it by cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone. They found that people who were regularly in touch with nature, their cortisol levels became lower. And they also found that by being regularly in touch with nature, it helped to reset and strengthen a healthy balance of what's called the circadian rhythm. Who's heard of that term before? The circadian rhythm. Okay, the circadian rhythm is what? It is the body's, it's the body's clock. Yeah. So what happens for us in the morning, there's a certain amount of cortisol which is released in the body which gets you out of bed in the morning. And in order to sleep at night, there's also a hormone, and it begins with M, it's called what? Melatonin, which helps you to have a deep rest. And what happens again, going back to this, what we spoke about earlier, because the modern society is so much more about profit and money or things and people, then what happens is rather than society being designed around what's healthy for human and spiritual functioning, right? Rather than society working according to the human needs, the human works according to the needs of the profit-making machine. You see? But yes, to your point, when people are in touch with nature, and exactly that point, Mother Earth, then the earth contact has that same nourishing and nurturing effect. Now what they're doing in circles around well-being, they're not talking about lifespan. It's very interesting the words that you use. They're not talking in terms of if you do this, you have 10 years of extra in your life. That's the old paradigm. Now the new paradigm they're speaking about, instead of lifespan, they're talking about health span. So it's not that you're going to have 10 years of extra life. They talk about you having 10 years of extra health, extra healthy life. Because the understanding is just because you're alive, if your health is really bad, you can't do anything anyway. Right? So it's not about living longer for the sake of living longer, but it's about the quality of your existence. So thank you for that point about walking, and adding to that about the environment that we're in. Someone else, what is it that you do that you found really helps you? Anyone else? I saw your hand. Yeah.
So we were discussing this. Something that I do and I find helpful is just generally movement.
Yes.
So it's just like a little discipline or meditation. So I find that if you do some sort of exercise, if you voluntarily do something difficult, you put your body through something difficult, so some exercise, weightlifting, running, whatever, you prime your body to deal with adversarial things that might come up throughout the day. It's a little bit easier.
Thank you. That was in my notes, and I wanted to mention that. How many of you have ever gone to the gym before? Okay. Now this is interesting. That activity of going to the gym, it's symbolic. What I mean by that is when you're going to the gym, what you're doing is you're actually building your own muscles up against some kind of resistance. You see? And that same principle is actually a law that in order to manage stress more effectively, one of the techniques is to incrementally expose yourself to something that causes you to have to stretch a little bit. Now, of course, incremental means it has to be the right level. If it's too much, it can cause burnout or some damage. But if it's too little, then we may not necessarily grow our capacity. So to your point, absolutely, just as going to the gym is building muscle by pushing it against some kind of resistance. In the same way, in our lives, sometimes we're able to build our ability to handle pressure, to strengthen or increase the size of our resilience bucket by doing some incremental activities which we get slightly better at day by day. I'll share with you a few other things I wanted to touch upon because I wanted to get deeper into this topic and also end with a key connection to the Bhagavad Gita. They found in the research that one of the causes of stress is a perception of injustice. Isn't that interesting? That when you perceive that you've been treated unfairly, again, same thing, expectation is here and the experience was somewhere else. That can actually cause people to be really stressed. One of the ways in which we are able to recalibrate that is actually through this ancient concept which you all have heard of in Western world and in the Eastern world, this concept of karma. Right? This concept that actually, even if something's happening to me, the world itself is like a living classroom. What I've been trying to do over many years is to really build this into my psyche, that the world is like a living classroom. And also, that things are not happening to me, things are happening for me. Meaning that if this world is like a living classroom, then instead of saying, why did this happen to me? The question changes. Instead of saying, why did this happen to me? The question becomes, what can I learn from this? How can I grow from this? We often don't like to admit it, or at least I don't like to admit it, but sometimes our greatest growth has come through the greatest adversity. Can anyone relate to that? Let's be honest, right? Sometimes the person that we're showing up as now in this world, the maturity that we have, the empathy that we have, the ability to understand, I know how you feel when you're going through that. That has all come because we've been in that person's shoes. We've had some difficulties ourselves. So it's no longer a theory for us. When we hear about what the person's going through, the heart's moved. I remember what it was like when I went through something similar. I feel for you. And that ability to feel for other people allows us to make very, very deep connections. In fact, one of the things I wanted to share, I have my notes here, is that actually, one of the key things that spiritual community, like the Think Gita community, one of the key things it provides is actually a stress relief. When you come and connect with people with similar values, not just similar values, but similar aspirations to live on a higher level. Whenever you get together with such people and you have real relationships where you can be vulnerable, open, honest, and grow, what actually happens is there's a hormone that's released between you and the other person, which is called oxytocin. Oxytocin is sometimes called the love hormone. It's present, especially between mothers and children. It's a bonding hormone. When people feel that I'm part of something bigger than myself, community, spirituality, connection to the supreme, and that relationship is nurturing. It's a real relationship. It's an active relationship. It is one of the most greatest and powerful ways of receiving or rebuilding one's capacity to handle pressure. If we take advantage of it, and if we're doing it with genuine examples of spirituality. So sincere spiritual practitioners who sincerely come together to help each other. Now, I have to be honest, if that's not sincere, that can also be a stressor. We should be very honest about that. But to the extent that those connections are sincere, authentic, it is one of the most powerful things that can help us in our lives. You watch carefully, you'll see that when you meet people who found their tribe, right? They found their genuine support group. They are there for them. Those people are also on their side, right? This famous saying, one for all and all for one. When you find people who found that real support network, they're incredibly strong. And it's not their personal strength. This is really important. And this is why in Vedic culture, there's so much emphasis on community. It's not about their personal strength. It's a strength of their support system. It's a strength of their ecosystem. Right? Well, is that famous saying is, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, you have to go with other people. Right? So when we have that ecosystem, not just individuals, but individuals who are also dedicated to a lifestyle and a value system which is all about help, not just their own growth, but working on themselves and also assisting their friends, their connections in being the very, very best that they can be. And that best is also spiritual, means spiritual. Right? When people are part of that kind of network, and if they value it and nourish that, you become like a force of nature. You become so powerful because you're now no longer relying on your own strength alone. You bring that, but they bring what they're sharing, and then all of you are also connected to the Supreme. That kind of network of real spiritual support is priceless. I gave this TED talk. I think it was last year or the year before, and we were talking about this. So I used this quote from Aristotle. Aristotle, this famous philosopher, said that the whole can be greater than the sum of its parts. And I was explaining how that works, because every one of us in this room, you contribute something. Now you could say, well, if everyone contributes 10 units of contribution, whatever it is, then if you get 5 people, 5 times 10 is 50, right? So it's just you add up what everyone's bringing individually. But actually that's wrong. This is why relationship and spiritual community is so important, because it doesn't work like that. If you have 5 people in the room and everyone is contributing 10 of their enthusiasm and so on, then you add those 5 people together, it's 50. But it doesn't stop there. Then there's another secret addition. That is the connection between each of those individuals. So everyone's carrying something themselves, but when they're connected, you also have to add what's being brought by the relationship. Just like when you have a complementary friendship, right? Again, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And therefore, you're able to achieve even more with actually less effort. So in spiritual societies, in ancient societies which were God conscious, the stress level of everyone was much less, and it was actually because I knew that these other people are there for me. They are there for me, I'm there for them. And therefore we can do amazing things together. So one of the most powerful benefits of genuine spiritual paths in this modern world, and you see it again and again, is that its ability to resurrect genuine community. Genuine community has to be based upon higher values. As long as we live in a me-centered world, then people are coming together like thieves. My teacher said it's just like most people, well, many marriages, right? So the partners come together, everyone's expecting a miracle to happen. So come on, make me happy, right? Hurry up. What are you going to do? Come on. It's your job to make me happy. Come on, make a miracle happen. Now, right? And so he said it's just like 2 thieves coming together trying to steal something from the other person. How can anyone be happy like that? But he said a genuine spiritual or God-centered relationship is where everyone, and it could be a friendship, it can be a marriage, it can be a family relationship, it can be a community. We're coming together and we see the other person or the other individuals. These people are gifts from God. And interestingly enough, we want to have a competitive relationship with them. Sounds strange, isn't it, right? How can you talk about spirituality and then say we should have a competitive relationship? So he explained that the competitive relationship means we're competing with each other. Who can be more kind? Who can be more caring? Who can be more supportive? Who can be more selfless? And when such relationships, genuinely spiritually centered relationships are happening, then the growth, the sweetness, the strength, and the ability to actually evolve become very strong. There's a wonderful analogy I saw. It talked about nature. It said that everything in nature grows when it's supple and vulnerable. You see? So when the plant's growing, you can see it's very flexible, very adaptive. And in those stages, it can really grow. The moment it becomes hard and rigid, it no longer is able to grow and develop. And the analogy was being given in relation to modern society. That if I become rigid, materialized, right? I'm going to identify my body. I'm just the body, and life is just about me getting what I want for my body and mind and senses. If I become like that, I actually become rigid. I start to identify with the gross physical vehicle. And that's exactly what Krishna warned Arjuna against. And he did that by establishing right at the beginning, Dehino sminyata dehi kormanyovanam jara. Tata dehantara praptiya dira tatra namuyate. He said, actually, you're not the body. First lesson of the Bhagavad Gita. And because you're not the body, we should still take care of it. We should still take care of it. Physically, mentally, emotionally. But we should also nourish the real self. Maybe we'll end on this point, because we want to make sure we close soon. But we should also nourish the real self. One of the biggest causes of stress is because we actually feel unhappy. And when I feel unhappy, we share it, isn't it? Right? Consciously, unconsciously, directly, indirectly. But when we feel nourished and full within, then we also share that abundance. So in essence, real spirituality, the message of the Bhagavad Gita, what Krishna is explaining to Arjuna, he says it so beautifully. Machita madgata prana, bodhayanta parasparam, kathayantascha mam nityam, tusyanticha ramanticha. He says it's a way of experiencing great bliss and great satisfaction. He's telling Arjuna, this is a secret. If you live like this, taking care of yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, but also nourishing yourself spiritually, then that bliss and satisfaction that you feel will make it very easy not to take the negative things that other people do personally. When you're full and someone gives you a hard time, you think, oh, maybe they had a bad day. It's okay, You feel full, you feel satisfied in yourself. Someone doesn't do something, oh, I understand. We show up in the world very, very differently. And that's the secret. That's the secret for recalibrating the way that we approach things, is to make sure that I'm empowered, satisfied, and nourished through my spiritual connection. And the easiest way that the Bhagavad Gita, as it is, and other Vedic literatures explain as to how to do this, is to engage in some genuine activity of service to the Supreme. What you will see over the next few decades, I'll put my life on it, what you will see over the next few decades is that increasingly spirituality will be something that people will feel a real attraction to, even in order to function well on the human level. Right? Even to function as a sane, well-rounded, holistic, functional human being who can have genuine heart-to-heart connections, you'll see people more and more will explore and apply these spiritual teachings of Bhagavad Gita as it is, understanding that actually, if I'm nourished from within, I can handle any challenge without. So, in summary, we understand that we do engage in things every day which helps us to manage our stress. You know some things that you do which have worked for you. In summary, we understand that stress has a lot to do with our perception. If we break it down to its raw essence, expectation and experience, right? When my expectations are based upon my own ideas rather than a deep wisdom tradition understanding, this is how the world works. These are the kind of patterns of conditioning that different people have. And what you should do with that understanding is you should love them anyway. You should see deeper. As you said, when I'm not stressed or when I feel very secure and someone does something wrong, I don't become enraged. I understand, there's probably something really going badly in their own lives which is so hard for them to deal with, which is why they're showing up in this particular way. When we nourish ourselves deeply, it actually is changing our perception of the world, and that enhanced and evolved perception literally makes us stress-proof, because the root cause of stress is my perception and my holding on to certain expectations which are not necessarily aligned with existence or my experience. And this is the power. This is just one of countless gems in the Bhagavad Gita. These literatures, they don't deal with the world in the normal way. They get deep into the essential understanding, and they recalibrate the way that we see the world. If someone keeps reading the Bhagavad Gita, it will subtly change your perception, and your perception of the world, the perception of other people, the perception of all things that you do will become so refined and so precise that you will know what to expect. And you'll also be able to respond in a compassionate and deep way, because you're carrying what you need inside you. No longer a slave of expectations from outside. Okay, so we'll stop there and see if we have any time for a quick Q&A, or if we need to
we
close.
do. First of all, let's just give a big warm thank you. Hands up if we feel spiritually nourished from this evening and energized. Amazing. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Beatrice. Has anyone got any questions for Ed? We've got a couple of minutes before we get our kids and ears.
She didn't leave because she was stressed, by the way. Just a disclaimer out there. But she had to go early.
Well, we'd love to have you back. Actually, before we move on, we've got a retreat happening next year in June, and later. Yeah, well, we've got a retreat happening. Ed is going to be our guest
guest speaker.
I'll be
I think
there.
you know about that, didn't you?
Yes, I do know about that. I'm not stressed, it's okay.
I'm not
I
just
agree.
throwing that on you as a surprise. But does anyone have any questions for Ed from this evening?
I saw a hand here.
There's one.
Yes.
How to deal with stress when you're working towards a place of security and filling your own cup, but still in a situation where there's constant and sometimes unexpected stress, like a family situation where like attachments are there, and there's a duty there also.
Thank you for a really good question. And I love the way you put that, because it is a journey. And I think that's the first thing that we have to really understand. If I know that I'm going on a journey, I prepare for the journey. I don't expect to reach my destination tomorrow. There's a wonderful speaker, and he was talking, and someone was talking to him, and they said that they'd burnt out, and they said that the reason why I burnt out was because of compassion fatigue, right? I was giving too much to other people. He said to them, he said, respectfully, you're wrong. He said that you've not burnt out because of compassion fatigue. He said, you burnt out because of lack of compassion fatigue. And he explained, you burnt out because of lack of compassion for yourself while you were trying to help other people. So when we understand that it's a journey, we prepare for the journey, meaning I'm going to be compassionate with myself. I don't expect myself to be there tomorrow. Right? But what I'm looking for is those small wins. Those small signs that I'm moving forward, I'm making some progress. Right? I'm getting closer to the goal. That's really important. It's important on the journey of compassion and stress management. It's important on the spiritual journey as well. There are signposts to say, right, today I meditated a little bit better on the names of the Supreme. Right? Today I was able to show up a little bit kinder when someone did something that I didn't agree with or didn't like. You know, today when I was able to be a little bit more patient with myself and with other people. Right? So when you notice these small successes, even with our friends and family, which may be sometimes challenging, some duties, if we notice these small successes, it actually gives us hope and motivation. Every time you get a small win, and not just a small win, every time you notice, this is why the Bhagavad Gita and these spiritual teachings are so important. Because so many things happen to us we're not even aware of. But if we were able to be conscious, wow, I did a little bit better today than I did yesterday, that gives you actually strength. The other thing that gives us strength when we're on the journey, see, sometimes the journey is difficult. And the journey itself is a hard journey. But what makes the journey much easier, what makes a difficult journey much easier, is who I'm going on the journey with. Does anyone relate to that? Right? You know, you're studying for exams. It's difficult, but the friends are fantastic, right? So we have a laugh together, we joke together. We were talking earlier today about how humor is very good for stress. When you can laugh, you actually reset your body and mind, right? It breaks the circuit. So when we're with friends, when we can be honest with people that we trust, and they still accept and love us, when you can do what you're doing. Very interesting. In one of the literatures called the Upadeshamrita, it talks about 6 loving exchanges. The Sanskrit term is Priti Lakshana. And within those loving exchanges, which are meant to happen between people who are on the spiritual journey, it talks about revealing the mind. So now, anyone do journaling? Anyone does journaling? Right. The reason why journaling is so powerful is because of expression. When you get something out of your system, it's again releasing some of the contents of that stress bucket. You get it out of the system, either by speaking about it with people who are close to you, by writing about it. But when you get it out of your system, you again build your capacity again. So to your question, the key thing isn't the things which are coming in. The key thing is, how much am I also emptying that out? You see, through conversation, through writing, through laughter, through exercise. That's why we wanted to give this particular model of the stress bucket, because it gives a very clear visual, symbolic representation. Yes, stress happens, life happens, no problem. It's going to happen with all of us. But what we can control is how we, again, throw things out of the bucket, empty the bucket, so again I've got capacity. This is really interesting for all of us. If we remember that we've got capacity and that things are going to come in even though we don't want them to, that's good. It's good because, again, it's real, it's honest. I don't want to lie to you. I don't want to say, oh, if you do this, no one will ever stress you out again. That's not real. And that sets people up for failure because I give you the wrong expectation. What I want to say is expect that there'll be challenges in life that we can't always control. Absolutely. But what you can focus on, is regularly emptying the bucket, right? Rebuilding our capacity on a regular basis. And you talked about some ideas yourself, but I would also add one other thing. The Bhagavad Gita itself is a stress relief. Because when we hear about higher considerations, it puts everything into perspective. One of the people we were talking to today, he was explaining that he was working in a very stressful area of his company. Very, very stressful. So then he moved a few years ago to work in a different area. So because his previous experience of stress was here, what he does now is not a big deal, right? And then he was telling a few leaders, he said that when he speaks to his team, and they're like, oh, this is really stressful. He's like, dude, you don't know what stress is, right? This is not stressful. I've experienced this. And it made me think about it, because I used to work for someone who was ex-military. So she'd served in Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan. And her idea of stress was, is anyone going to die? Right? And, so she'd left the military, she was working in some company, and she would just ask, is anyone going to die? And if the answer is no, then it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal at all. And it taught me that benchmark. We carry this unconsciously. You have a benchmark, right? And so you're comparing things to what your benchmark is. If your benchmark is at a certain point, then when you compare it, is it as bad as something I've been through? No, it's not a big deal. So these are some things to really think about. When we read the Bhagavad Gita, it gives us perspective. It helps us to understand that whatever you're experiencing right now, just like you did this in the past, be very clear on this. You've been through stressful situations in the past. When you were going through it, it was work, it was hard. And you came out the other side. And you look back at it and say, that was difficult, but I got through it. Just like it was in the past, so it shall be now and in the future. And remembering, that's why we call it that verse, Matraspastas tukuntaya, shitoshna sukha dukkada. Things come and go. And if I remember that, if I connect regularly with this Bhagavad Gita wisdom, it puts things in perspective. And when things are put in perspective, it makes it much easier to deal with. It makes something that looks this big or feels this big, once it's in perspective, it can actually go down in size. My wife talked about when she discovered that her brother had cancer. So when that happened, that put everything in perspective, right? You can have this issue or that issue, but someone's got cancer, they could potentially die. It puts everything in perspective. So these things actually make a difference. Incremental, noticing your improvement, having close relationships where you can express, even writing expression, and also spiritual wisdom to see, yes, something's going on, but it helps to put it in perspective, which allows me to keep moving forward. Does that answer your question? Thank you. Any other question? Yes.
First of all, I could ask so many questions. This was incredible. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I guess the one I've chosen to ask is I was quite struck by the point where you were speaking about how when children grow up in an environment where they feel protected, then this really has an effect on how they relate to the world and how they deal with things like that in life. I'm a parent. I've got 3 children, and I think my fault as a parent is that I'm probably a little overprotective. We're sort of living in a world where, I'm 50 years old, so I've sort of seen the world change a lot over the last 20, 30 years, and especially in terms of how the world is now so public. We're seeing every single detail of everything that's happening all around the world unfold before our eyes.
Which is problematic.
Yeah, and so as a parent, it can make you a little overprotective of your children. So I just wonder if you could say something about that, how to find the balance between showing protectiveness and kindness, but not being overprotective to the point where it may actually be harmful to the children.
Yeah. This is a big topic. When you shared your question, being very transparent with you, I remember something I'd actually heard specific to this, specific to parenting, specific to overprotection. So, how to put it? There are some speakers who talk about how just throw them out there, let them kind of find their way, etc. You know, don't mollycoddle them because we're harming them. And there are some who actually talk about the importance of protection. Again, this is where the Vedic knowledge excels. It really excels. I looked into this. I actually researched this from the Ayurvedic point of view and the Vedic literature point of view. And there was such a brilliant reconciliation of both points. Okay, so this is very interesting. And this is also found by modern science as well. So you can look, everything I'm sharing with you, feel free to look this up and check this out independently. So, but what they found in modern science, which is also there in Ayurveda, is that between the ages of 0 to 5, the child's psychology is still very impressionable. So to use a modern day equivalent, high neuroplasticity. Okay, when the child is in the womb, phenomenally high neuroplasticity. So they're actually receiving the impressions from the mother while they're in the womb, phenomenally high. And then the ages of 0 to 5 is still very, very high neuroplasticity. So in the Ayurvedic literatures, it says that between the ages of 0 to 5, and especially when the woman's pregnant, it is extremely important that the child receives lots of unconditional love. What that does is it leaves deep, the Sanskrit term for this is samskars. It leaves deep impressions in the child's consciousness that they are wanted, they are important, they are valuable, and that the world is a safe place, right? Now, at the same time, from the ages of 5 onwards, they're meant to also be engaged in being responsible, right? Now, I read a study on this just the other day, actually, and I can find it if anyone wants. There was an article, and it talked about how children who were given responsibility, not too young, but when they're of a certain age, they tend to be much more successful in life. Because when you give it to them when they're relatively young, they develop a work ethic, but it doesn't feel like work. Have you noticed that when you're an adult, there's a lot going on, right? Yeah, and if you have that training when you're young, it doesn't feel like work because you're just so used to it. Right? So not overworking, but just, something fun that they can take responsibility. You help mum and dad, do this, or pull away the dishes, whatever it is. So both things are actually required. When they're older, they need to be given some freedom to expose, but it's on the basis of the unconditional love that they accepted when they were younger. You see, so actually both things are valuable, but at different points. If when they're very young, they're just exposed to everything, that's not good. Because they're again, you can look at all this research. In Ayurveda, it says at the age of 5, the intelligence develops properly. Okay? Now, before the intelligence has developed, if they're just exposed to stuff, even if it's negative, they won't be able to process it properly. So basically between the ages of 0 to 5, whatever the parents do to the child, it's basically forming the child's subconscious mind. That's what it actually does. It's leaving the deepest impressions on their subconscious mind, which is like the foundation that they're going to build upon. Many people have issues in their life, and it's not stemming from what they're consciously doing. If you ask them, they've got no issue. But you'll find that some of the habits, fears, patterns of behavior, the person doesn't even want to do it. It's coming from their subconscious. And that has a lot to do with impressions growing up. Now, so 0 to 5, they should be given the unconditional love. When they're 5 onwards, they should be given responsibility. And what that does, 0 to 5 teaches you you're unconditionally important. 5 to 15 teaches you we've already established you're important, but so is everyone else. Right? So 0 to 5 gives you rights. You are inherently valuable. You have a right to be treated with respect and dignity. 5 to 15 gives you responsibility. Right? Because my rights is someone else's responsibility. You see, there's a symbiotic relationship. Now, what that means basically for us is that wherever we are, we can evaluate what we didn't get, and then we can balance up. And it's important for parents to do this actually as well. Because sometimes the overprotectiveness, and I'm not saying specifically your case, I don't know your case, but sometimes the overprotectiveness is to do with our own patterns actually. You see? So what we found is that the more I calibrate whatever's going on within me, the more I show up for other people in a healthy way as a side effect. Yeah? Like that. And then taking it one step on in terms of practicality, you can look and observe and also your partner or whoever, as they observe, you can actually also work out what does my children need at this time in order for them to flourish and develop. You know, so by observing them, if I see that they can't function as well as other young people at a particular age, then I may think, okay, that may be a clue that I'm going to do something slightly differently, right? So you can always see and observe what's working well, what may be needed, and then change my approach. And I can test if my approach is working because the things that I see are needed are now coming up and flourishing more in that person. Does that make some sense? Yeah? So those are some ways in which you can think about it. There was something I saw on that particular point about the overprotection of children. Maybe I'll get your details. I can send you that because then you can actually see a bit more on that topic. Because that's something I saw it more than once actually, and they talked specifically about that particular point. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Cool. That's it, unfortunately, for questions. But Ed's going to be around a bit later, so I'm sure you'll be able to grab it for questions. And we've got you at the retreat as well next year. I'd just like to invite our kirtaniers to come on stage. We're going to have some wonderful kirtan music, which is some meditation, transcendental meditation for us to enjoy. And just another thank you to Ed for this evening. And Beatrice as well.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.
wonderful gift, and here's a warm thank you.